Hello. Uh, this week has been a very serious week on the news. You could say the past 2 weeks, the past month, aside from coronavirus, there have been a lot of news about the Black Lives Matter movement and things going on. So for today, we'll be doing a very different show. And as far as how the Dad Bod Squad stands on it, Black Lives Matter. As far as how our parent company stands on it, the Real People Production Company, which I started with these two great guys, Black Lives Matter. Part of the reason that I started the company and part of the reason the Dad Bod Squad exists was to create an environment that amplified diverse voices. It's important to me as a Latinx person. It's important to me as a human being in general that everyone can tell their story. And it's become evident as to why that's important with the video that's come out of George Floyd having a knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 47 seconds. And in that video, you can see his life go. And that is not okay. Nowhere is it ever okay for police to abuse their power and not protect the community that their whole job is to protect. That's where we stand on it. 100%. We are with every African American in this country. We are with the African Americans in our company. We are with you 100%. Always. Whether that be in protests, whether that be in signing petitions, whether that be in giving donations to the movements that need it, we are with you. Always. The advancement of one of us is the advancement of all of us. And so we will always be there to help advance your movement however we can and to have those important conversations. And so that's what we'll be doing today. We'll be having the important conversations that need to happen across the country to make that generational difference. And so I hope you'll stick with us for a much more serious show. Um, but that's what we feel is necessary. We usually make escapist content. We make funny podcasts, funny videos, and those are great. But now is not a time to escape. Now is the time to face the truth and face the bigotry that exists in this country. So that is what we'll be doing for today. So I hope you'll stick with us and join us as we have these important conversations. Thank you.
Hi guys. It's me, your boy Will. Um, so the Real People Production Company and the Dad Bod Squad. We're usually stationed in San Marcos when we're all together. Unfortunately, due to Corona, we're a bit split up at the moment. But when we're together, we're in San Marcos. And recently, um, a student at the San Marcos Texas State University, his name is Justin Howell. He was hit with a rubber bullet, and he's in critical condition. There are a lot of people that are protesting, getting hurt while they're protesting, and he's a person that's close to the company, and we'd love it if you would check out his GoFundMe or check out the GoFundMe's and the fundraisers for everyone protesting and getting hurt, protesting for Black Lives Matter, and being hurt by officers while they're out there. Um, we'll have links for fundraisers to help those in the hospital or uh, for Justin Howell at the in the links of the video. And if you're also protesting, we pray that you stay safe. We always want y'all to stay safe while y'all are protesting an event that matters and a protest that matters a lot to the Black community. Thank you. I think next we're going to talk about just kind of our different perspectives on the Black Lives Matter movement, the protests, and everything. Um,
Okay, I will. I think it's my. I will go. I will go. But yeah, I remember when I was younger. I remember when George Zimmerman was in the news for what he did to Trayvon Martin, and I remember getting into arguments with people about it in terms of George Zimmerman being guilty. And I remember arguing, even though he was found innocent, I remember arguing like he should have been found guilty. And I remember being dismissed about that because I was just a child. And I was just a child. And I remember people telling me, no, you don't have the right to talk about this. You don't know what you're doing. They found it's official. He's found innocent. And so one thing that I like to do then, because I'm the son of a lawyer, I like to point out just people's. I found it interesting that people were willing to accept that more than other cases, like with O.J. Simpson or Casey Anthony. And so I remember I would always throw that right back into their face. And you know, looking back on it now, granted, I could have formed my arguments better to support it, but I think the fact that I still have to put up this argument like 10 years later, it's not great. It because it to me it just feels like I've shouted into the void and then no one's heard me. And then it continues on. So I can only imagine how it must be feeling to other people. Cuz I'm like, even though I have argued about it with countless people, I know that there are other people who feel way more intense feelings, and they are completely justified. And it just it mind boggles me. And I do understand why that's happening in terms of me arguing in terms of where I come from. I come from Brownsville, Texas, which is a small little town on the border of the United States, and we do not have a large population of people who are black. Most of the population here in Brownsville, Texas, are people who are Latinx, and so I think that there's a certain people don't seem to have the same respect for Black Lives Matter down here as in other areas. It's like I like to think of it like the valley down here. Sometimes it's a little bubble, and so this. Although I will say lately we've been breaking the bubble a little bit with this past case of George Floyd. But the fact that the this is the first time that I've seen such unification on this, when just years ago I've been seeing the same people I've been arguing against continue to argue against what I'm saying in support of Black Lives Matter. It just it I'm glad, but also at the same time I wish we all came to this consensus earlier, just so that the long list of lives taken weren't this long. But I will let you guys continue.
For sure. Me personally, I grew up in Navasota, Texas, which is a very diverse town. Um, all things considered, you had there was a large Latino population, there was a large African American population, and a decent sized white population. So I grew up around everyone in that, and what kind of happens there is that there's a positive in that you don't necessarily uh, you don't become discriminatory yourself, because you grew up around them. They're just people to you. The downside to it was that I was very ignorant to a lot of racial issues in the country. I didn't know that racism was as much of a problem as I found out it was later on growing up. Because as far as I was concerned, everyone was just a person. Um, there were people that the projects just there was a large government housing area there, and so I saw the disparities in that and how systemic racism can kind of lead African Americans and minority groups to those government housing areas. And I realized that as I grew older. But other than that, I never really thought about race in that way. And then I moved to Brenham, Texas, where I am now, and I learned a lot more. I learned that I did need to think about my race a bit more, because I realized that I didn't fit in quite as much. Because what ended up happening there was that uh, it was mostly white town. It was mostly people of European German descent, and not that they ever treated me wrong. Brenham is a very they were very open minded as far as the younger generation goes, and they never treated me badly. But what I did learn was that uh, they had a school that it was basically segregation. I mean, they had it used to be an only black school that they didn't tear down. Instead, what they did was, of course, like minority housing was around that area, and they all went to school there. So, what does that lead to? Well, in high school, I moved to Brenham, and in high school, all I saw was kind of like self segregation. There was no diversity in that. Um, everyone kind of sat with their own group, and I was blown away by that. I used to get made fun of by other Latino people in Brenham because I didn't follow the stereotypes of a Latino person, and I didn't understand that. I was lucky. I was a part of the theater program, and the theater program never had these issues. They never, brought up my race or it just never came up. To them, I was always a person, and I'm very thankful for being in that environment. But Brenham had work to do. Luckily, I got to see them begin a busing program, which meant that they focused on equal diversity in all three elementary schools. And I look forward to seeing how that benefits them in the future. But just like in that case, and in this case, it was too late. You know what I mean? There are so many adults now that grew up without that necessary diversity. What I do love to see though is that a lot of my Brenham classmates are posting online their support. I've even seen a lot of my Brenham classmates out there protesting in Houston, in Austin. I'm happy to see that. It disappoints me to see that my Navasota classmates, on the other hand, um, are kind of remaining silent in this. And to an extent, I understand. What you post online by no means signifies what you believe, because some of us just aren't online in that way. Some of us don't use our phones that much. So, okay, there might be some of my Navasota classmates out there protesting, and I don't know about it. And to them, I apologize. This is for you. If you're out there doing something, then you are doing something. And no one can take that from you. Absolutely. Um, but it's just it's crazy to see how much of the racism still continues. And as a Latinx person who never really thought about himself as Latinx, it's I mean, it's about time. Like I hate the fact that I didn't think about it too much until really, until I went into college, and then it became something that I thought about all the time. You know, uh, it was too late for me, but I'm happy that I can make those changes. I'm happy that I can have the conversations with my family about it, to make sure that it's not too late for them or my younger sister, and that it can continue. Um, but that's where I come from. I come from kind of being ignorant to the issues in this country, and I'm glad that we're moving forward from that. Yeah.
Uh, Hi. Um, I I was born around in the Houston area, but I grew up mainly in the Dallas Fort Worth area. I moved around a lot as a kid, and now I live in uh, a small town called Midlothian, Texas, and um, the neighborhood I live in now is uh, primarily white. Midlothian is, and um, before I'd grown up with a lot of different races, a mixed group of people, in just the Dallas Fort Worth area. But down in Midlothian, I found it's a bit different um, living here. I found myself, I've had to change a few aspects about the way I see people because I've experienced in my time here people that were more racist and people that were okay with other people being racist around them. And so I've had to teach myself to, I've had to teach myself how to act around people that are okay with racist ideals. Um, and part of that is standing up for myself and telling them that this kind of thing isn't okay. Um, and now I go to college at Texas State University, and from what I found there, the San Marcos area in general is a very accepting place with a very wide um, array of people, or at least the people that I've met and the people that I associate myself with down in San Marcos. Um, and recently, with the George Floyd murder and the protests and everything that's been going on, I find a lot of I find comfort back here in Midlothian because recently there have been an enormous amount of people coming around, coming to Black Lives Matter protests, and people that are seeing the error of the systemic racism and uh, the police departments around America, and it's really comforting to see them speak up. And this whole week, since the George Floyd case has come up, me and my family, my sister, my mom, even my grandma, we've been attending protests, some marches, peaceful protests, and we're planning on continuing to go to them until like reform and change is made, until systemic racism is a problem that our government is paying attention to and a problem that our government is working on fixing and has fixed. Because from my perspective and a lot of people's perspective, there is a lot that our government should be doing that they aren't doing to um, stop the perpetuated racism in police departments and um, like law enforcement. And I'm for protests. And yeah, I'd love to see our government and just the communities and America come to an understanding. So yeah, do you want to come back? We can have a conversation.
Yes. And just what one I want to kind of just I want to talk about one thing that kind of made like frustrated me, just that was being brought up. It's already been brought up before several times on Twitter, but like, and during the All Lives Matter protests, people have been bringing up, oh, but there's this police officer case where they were doing the same thing that they did with George Floyd, but to a white man. And see, so there, that you shouldn't be protesting because they're doing it to white people. And the thing that frustrated me about that is, why aren't they angry about that then? I don't. And to jump on that, that's it.
I completely agree with you. The whole idea of police brutality should be something that we're dealing with as well with our police. It's just not okay.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah.
and also on top of that, that still doesn't dispute the fact that there is still a disproportionate amount of people who are black who are affected by this versus people who are white.
Right.
Just
Exactly.
if you're going to use the argument that it happened to someone who's white, then it's sort of my issue with it is it's sort of like these people who are doing the All Lives Matter. It's like they have this conclusion, and they're trying to find evidence to get to that conclusion versus using the evidence that's presented to form a conclusion of their own.
Right.
And
Yeah.
as the son of a lawyer, again, I'm gonna bring that up. That doesn't sit right with me. I'm just, I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated that it's gone on for like it's gone on for more than just a few decades, and that's what's just it's just no it's frustrating me when people are using the same arguments that they were 5 years ago. That's what's frustrating to me, and,
Yeah.
and it's just I always want to just kind of them because like
For sure,
it
man.
fills me with all this ugh.
Right. There are some people that say that, well, the majority of the time, the cops in this country are doing their job. Like they're doing the right thing. And like, maybe that's true, but this is a job where you can't afford to have a few bad cops. You know what I mean? A bad cop shouldn't exist. Shouldn't have a job.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? We don't look at airplane pilots, and this is quoting Chris Rock, but you don't look at airplane pilots and we're like, yeah, there are a few bad pilots, you know.
yeah,
Like that's not okay, you know. So
like
why would it be okay for a police officer to be a bad cop?
exactly. And also another thing that I want to point out to people is that like I understand people are saying like, oh, but police officers are for it into this state of where they have to be constantly on edge, and sometimes they may get trigger happy, and it's like okay, but that the fact that a trained officer has to deal with this amount of stress is part of the job versus civilians who are affected by this, citizens who are affected by this, who didn't sign up to be put in that level of stress. And it's
Mhm.
just,
And I'm in the unique position that my dad, he's an armed security officer for the Bush Library here in at A&M, and so he works with cops, right? He works with the police department, and he's told me like there is a difference between how cops respond to African American men versus white white men. Like there's a difference when they hear on the radio there's an African American man committing a crime. Their alertness and they're being on edge is different than how they would respond to a white male on their radio. And that's not okay in itself. Like there shouldn't be an immediate assumption. that there's going to be a violent thing going on, or that they need to have their weapon ready. Like there shouldn't be an immediate assumption for anyone.
Yeah, apprehension that cops oftentimes get when an African American is involved in their line of work is extremely inappropriate, and it's also a problem in the way that people are taught how to respond to Black men and women. Because a lot of these behaviors that cops have are learned behaviors from either other cops or racist um, I, racist ideas that people in their family um, have given them, not in their family, but in their community and their among their peers have given them. Um, because, as we all know, Black people are just people. Um, I saw a video of some kind recently talking about how a dog um, is just a dog until like you see a dog bite someone. Um, and if you've only seen a dog bite someone before, the next time you see a dog, you're going to be apprehensive. So to learn behavior, being scared of something like a dog.
Absolutely. You
Uh,
know, that's kind of like, yeah, it's something that happens like systemically too with, you know, whether it be that, learned racism, which is, learned from your parents, when you get those learned biases, like it happens, it's something that I know I've seen people fight against, um, fighting against those learned behaviors and those learned biases.
Yeah, and just tying back with all of that, I I remember there was one time where in one of these arguments that I brought up, where I argued, someone showed me a clip of a police officer getting shot by surprise when they were getting pulled over. The person reached down real quick, and within a split second, they shot the police officer. And when I watched that, I thought that was terrible. I that that just immediately that hurt me, and I felt terrible. But most cases about these injustices, well, take for instance Sandra Bland. She was
Mhm.
pulled over for failing to use a turn signal, correct?
Right.
It it, it comes down to, I understand in that in specific instances that's possible, but at the same time you are a police officer and you're trained to handle those situations, and you know that that's not in the most likelihood of the situations that you're going to come against. I
Right.
mean, I know with me personally, and I know we talked about this in private, but I know with me personally, I I'm scared of cops. Like I am generally like, I'm not scared of firefighters. I'm not scared of EMTs. I brought this up, but when it comes to cops, there's a general like kind of jitteriness inside of me, and I'm a generally jittery person. Now, I can only imagine how much that fear is for people
Hmm.
who don't have the privilege I have of being white or partially white.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I myself, I'm also afraid of cops. Like I see that stuff happening, and it's terrible, and it happens a disproportionate amount to African Americans. It happens also to members of the Latinx community, and you know, I I I I fear for it. Like I definitely like when I get stopped by the cops, I definitely I tense up, and I prepare to sound as professional or as white as I can. As if that's going to give me like an ease with the officer.
Yeah, I completely agree. Um, there isn't a time in my life where I've seen a cop and at least a time in my life where I can remember, where I've seen a cop and my heart hasn't started like just racing just from sight of one or just knowing that one is around. And it's not because I think I should be afraid or that I should be afraid of any cop. It's because of, again, learned behaviors.
Right.
I've seen in the news all my life, and I've been taught by my mom all my life that cops shoot people.
Mhm.
Cops can shoot innocent people, and once the system of cops being retrained um, or reforms in the system are made, I hope that one day I may feel more comfortable around an officer. But until that happens, I, I keep to what I've been told. I act as, like you said, John, as professional as possible, and I'll keep my hands on the steering wheel. I don't ride in my car without my wallet already on the dash so I can have it out when a cop um, walks up. And honestly, I think everyone who experienced this kind of thing can attest. It's a really scary, or it can be a very scary experience.
Right. You know,
And I
sorry, go ahead, Zach.
and yeah, and I just I want to bring to also just I understand also that there are like already with these protests, and we've already gotten some results in the form of that the three other police officers were charged, and they did raise the degree to the second degree murder,
Mhm.
which I think that is great,
Yeah,
but that doesn't mean this is over. And
of course not.
to see the lengths that we've gone, like these protests, like so many people put in so much dedication into them, and it took all this time and all this dedication just to get this situation, just to get these three officers charged and raise the degree, when it shouldn't have been that difficult.
Absolutely. That's pretty much what I was gonna say. I mean, like the fact that the attorney general, the DA, come up there and they're like, "You don't understand how hard it is to prosecute cops." It shouldn't be that hard though. If there's viable proof, if we can watch a video of someone losing their life, then that's it. If there's a video of me robbing a liquor store, if there's a video of me robbing a gas station, I'm arrested like that.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, and as far as I'm concerned, cops are citizens. Cops are still citizens. So there shouldn't be an extra level of treatment for them as far as like the difficulty on whether or not we can arrest them or not.
Yeah.
We can arrest them. There's them committing the crime. Let's arrest them. Okay, we're gonna investigate. Great. Let's investigate, but let's make sure that they're arrested for the crime that they just committed.
Yeah, and like, so I've heard people use the argument of the reason why why people get put in this situation is because you have to understand cops don't cops don't necessarily aren't paid as much, or cops aren't necessarily trained as much, and it just that just makes me think, like, why aren't there more restrictions or more requirements in order to become a cop? Why aren't there more things put in place? And of course, I think another issue is just generally just the sense of brotherhood between police officers. And so that's when people right now are talking about, screw the police and all of that stuff. They aren't. I've seen it posted. They aren't, for the most part, they aren't talking about like individual cops, although some of them are. But I think they're mainly referring to this whole system that the police have put in place.
Yeah.
Exactly. Cops should definitely be held to a higher accountability. The people that are enforcing the laws that we follow should definitely be held to a higher accountability for the laws that they're breaking, and they should
Yeah.
be treated exactly the way that law is intended for them.
Yeah. I can't get out of my head like the moment that, I'm watching that George Floyd video and he's crying out for his mother. And he says it repeatedly, call my mom, call my mama, and I don't understand how anyone could not have sympathy in that moment. And then I think about like, every African American woman that has the fear of giving birth to an African American man and the fear that goes through their mind every time their son walks out the door. That shouldn't be the case. You shouldn't be afraid of your son coming out dark skinned. Like that shouldn't be a thing. That should never be in the back of anyone's mind. And that's all I can think about when I think about that moment of him crying out for his mother. I think about, all the African American women in this country that just have to go through that fear of having a black son.
Yeah. And yeah, I think just generally as we wrap up before we go into intermission, I I seeing the footage of police officers using the level of force they're using right now at these protests, the reason why they're using this is because people are protesting against them and they don't like that. So they just want it to stop. That's not how protests should work. I It frustrates me just the levels these some of these police officers have gone, and just hearing about people affected by it, like Justin Hell, and people. I've heard of people going permanently blind in one eye because of getting shot with a rubber bullet, and situations like that, or cops kneeling or pretending to kneel and then shooting out gas canisters, situations like that. That frustrates me very much to these peaceful protests, and so just as we wrap this up, on my end, I'm just gonna say, continue speaking up, and continue taking action, and we will have the links to petitions and everything down below.
Yeah, for sure. If you're going to be active in your community or a community close by to yours, make sure that you're staying safe, wearing a mask because COVID's still around, and because if cops are using tear gas or bullets, be partial protection. Wearing some eye gear can also be very helpful. Keeping solution water on you at all times, and keeping your phones on airplane mode or also helps. I'm not exactly sure why, but yeah, just make sure you all stay safe while you're out there.
Mm, And
100%.
yeah, and I think on that note, as we come closer towards intermission, we will end this off before intermission, just saying, make sure you take action and do all you can, and we will see you once intermission has ended.
Hello, welcome back from intermission. So what we were talking about was kind of like the changes that have to happen in law enforcement. Uh, Something that we saw in the news was Joe Biden offering possibly like a law enforcement oversight, an oversight committee, a committee for law enforcement dedicated to making sure that the brutality doesn't happen, and I think that's a good idea. I mean, we're seeing even more brutality. We were talking about it before in the protests. I think it's ridiculous. I think I mean the videos that I've seen just from Austin PD are just ridiculous. I mean,
Yeah,
what
people
I
laying down, and police still pushing them over, moving them aggressively, and
yeah,
arresting.
yeah, Austin PD just did not. and I expected more from them considering how liberal Austin is and how much Austin citizens are a part of these movements. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I saw a friend, someone I know that goes to Texas State, like their arm was broken from the beanbag bullets. Like that was just ridiculous. Like they have a metal rod in their arm for protesting, and they didn't do anything illegal. You know what I mean? Like and then I look at Houston, and we saw the Houston chief. He was on world news just for saying, we are with you. We are against those cops. This isn't Houston. And that chief of police was with those protesters, walked with those protesters. And I don't understand how you can be a part of a police department, watch that, and then not want to do the same. You know what I mean? Like part of your job should be community outreach, and this is like the best chance you have at that.
And also another thing I'm going to bring up is just Michael Moore's statement about, oh, it just frustrated me so much when he brought up the life of George Floyd is as much on the police officers who did it as it's on the protesters, or something along the lines of that. And that frustrated me because that was incredibly distasteful. And it
Yeah.
showed me there's how it showed me, going back to what we brought up earlier, how strong the ties within the police community really are.
Yeah.
Because that's ridiculous.
That's one of those things I can't understand. There are some people that like pride themselves on being like the devil's advocate in every conversation. And like this is one of those situations where there is no being a devil's advocate. Like if you are being a devil's advocate in these situations, you need to look at yourself and ask yourself, how could you? How could you in this moment portray yourself as a devil's advocate in these to offer any semblance of just defending the other side? That doesn't make any sense to me. And I know there are some people out there, there are people that I know that would do that, and I can't understand why in any way you could find the moral sense in you to play a devil's advocate when talking about these issues.
Definitely, definitely. Like these time and these days, this is a historical event, and there's definitely a right side of history, and then there's a wrong side of history to be on in this situation.
Oh yeah. I put it on my Twitter. I put something along the lines of, I don't see how, with all of these incidents that all these incidents of excessive force by cops on these protests, I don't see how the future is going to paint the police officers as the good guys.
Right.
Although, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised because of this country's past with doing that.
Right.
And like, how they say in the end history is written by the victors. But I really, really though can't see how they would twist these events, these incidents of police's use of excessive force, gotten to the point of a lot of these protesters having critical injuries and some even dying. I don't see how it can be twisted to make them the good guys in the future.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the evidence is definitely stacked against them. Like there is really no way to get around what is caught on camera at these protests and at these events.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I was also just gonna bring up like the use of I like seeing police officers destroy supplies of the protesters too. Like I know in one case the supplies were deemed to be appropriate for the protesters, and then the police officers still destroyed them. I mean,
Right.
I think that just goes to show you, back to my point originally, that police officers right now, their goal isn't to protect anybody, it's to end this protest because this protest is not making them look great. But I think in the end, they're only hurting themselves.
I agree.
Definitely, for sure.
Yeah. You can. I just, I go back to Houston as far as like how great of an example the police force, how they stepped in. I mean, literally walking with protesters, walking on the side of protesters. And what were they doing? They were protecting the protesters. That was their goal, protecting the protesters, making sure that there was no violence that was going to incite out, not just for their officers, but making sure that the riots that could have happened wouldn't have injured the protesters protesting. So that's what they were doing, and they were with the protesters, and that was so symbolic to me. And immediately it makes me feel safer, like, going into the Houston area with how close I live to it. And I hope that the police in my area are watching that and just, agreeing with it. It makes me nervous when I have to go back to San Marcos, and that's 30 minutes away from Austin, seeing Austin PD just hurt the protesters for no reason. Just seeing them, like, I mean, and if you don't believe us, you can look this up. You can look this up as far as how Austin PD has responded to these protesters. And I understand that there's been looting, there's been some looting in Austin. That's not an excuse to hurt the peaceful protesters. And if you don't think that that's happening, I mean, I can send you pictures of my friends who were protesting in Austin, having rubber bullets shot at them, having beanbag bullets shot at them, broken bones. I mean, we talked about Will's friend earlier. In no way has Austin PD's response to this been okay. And it's just been going on across the country. The fact that you can look up endless videos of police brutality during these protests, I mean, just proves that there is a massive problem. It's not a few bad cops. It's a good amount of bad cops, is what it is.
And also, I don't know if I don't know, but like honestly, I haven't seen enough footage, right? I haven't seen any footage really of police officers defending these businesses from being looted as much as their focus is on ending these protests. Like they bring up how they're trying to ensure peace and they want to avoid chaos. But at the same time, I don't see them stepping out of their way to stop looting. I've seen footage of a news reporter trying to help a woman protect her business, and then a police officer, them signaling a police officer to help them stop it from being looted, and the police officers come and arrest the store owners.
Yeah.
It's definitely a problem. Like, we don't see police officers standing outside of the stores that are being looted or that could be potentially looted. They're standing outside of, like, they're blocking streets for protesters to go down when there's definitely more that they could be doing.
Yeah.
I just, yeah.
One thing I saw was, Rhett from Rhett and Link. I don't know if you guys ever watch Good Mythical Morning, but
Yeah.
he put out this great video about him checking himself, as far as like, he said, like, it was like a letter to his younger self, as far as like fighting against, like, subconscious racism put into you by, the biases given to you by your parents, by sometimes religion, by different things like that, by your environment, and fighting against it as much as possible. He had a great video on it. I highly recommend looking it up. But it was great to see, just because I saw people from my Brenham classmates that just were posting about that, and they were people who I've never seen talk about political stuff. Never. Like, I went to high school during, my senior year was when the uh, you know, Trump was being reelected, or junior year, something like that. Trump was being elected, and a lot of people stayed silent, like, politically, you know, and to see these people, those same people posting, Black Lives Matter, and posting about that video, being inspired by it, was just great. And I think it's something that we all have to do, is just fight against those racial biases that we may have given to us by our privilege, by our parents, by our religion, just things like that.
Yeah. and to a certain extent, I understand people being silent to a certain extent. Not that I, of course, in any way encourage that, but to a certain extent, I understand it. It's like what you were saying before, like people who you wouldn't expect to be political, and just people who are just have the fear of posting anything out in the world. You know, just generally people who don't like posting stuff too much on social media. Like, I
Yeah.
understand their silence because I've been in their shoes before.
Right.
In the sense of like not knowing what to post on social media. I still want to encourage them to speak up and to take action and to spread the word about how to take action. But I think my main issue would be with people who have had no restrictions on social media, people who love social media, people who are actively on there and then who are actively not posting it anywhere.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I've seen that a lot from some people that, not necessarily anyone that I know at Texas State, but people that I went to high school with. I see that a lot. I've seen those people a lot, and they're still posting about their get-togethers and their pool parties, and I don't understand that at all, really.
Yeah, and I just want to make it clear. It's just I don't I'm not we're again we're not saying at least I'm not saying now's not the time for anybody to have fun. I'm not saying
Yeah,
I'm not even saying I'm not even saying not to post some of that. I think my issue is that you're if you have a voice and you've been using it for all of these things, can you help out using your voice for these other things?
for sure. I mean, because the way I think about it is like, I posted something. I posted a Spanish poem that I wrote about being Latino and being, and how I was feeling. And I posted that on my Facebook. I never post anything political on there, just because of the family members that I have there that are extremely, they're not political. They're very sensitive, so I didn't want to offend them. But I was at a point where I was like, well, those are the people that need to see this. Those are the people that I'm like, I don't support you being iffy about this. I need you to know where I stand on this, and I need you to see it. And you know, granted, I don't have the biggest Facebook, so not many people saw it, but I was just happy that at the very least, like I know for a fact they had the availability to see it. I was getting to people that remain ignorant on some of these topics. And I think that's part of your power. If you're one of those people, that is posting all the time, but you're staying silent on this right now, you have the ability to get to the people that are ignorant on these things. You have the ability to educate them on these things. And why wouldn't you take that opportunity?
Yeah.
Yeah, now more than ever, it's something that we can afford not speaking out and not continuing to speak out. My biggest fear right now is that um, these protests are going to lose momentum. Like in Houston, we got support from the police. In Flint, Michigan, there's support from the police, and I'm afraid that the protests, because they have the support of the police, might slow down. I'd love to see the protests continue until these issues are solved, and I don't know if that's going to be solved anytime soon. Um, like we're coming up with the presidential election here in a couple months, and I'm honestly really afraid that if people don't continue to protest, don't continue to post on their social media um, about these injustices that we're facing right now, that they will never be heard, because with our current president Trump, I don't, I cannot see him ever taking these issues into account in a serious way. Um, so that reminder, please go vote. And I myself am I'm not always on social media. I'm not Um, on Instagram, I'm not really on Snapchat. I don't have a Twitter, but now I like during these times I will be more active and posting these important events that are coming up and spreading the message. And we'd appreciate it if all of y'all kept spreading the message as well.
For sure. And Will, I want you to know that me and Zach commend you for going out there and protesting. Like seriously, the fact that you're actually out there. You're not. I've done some online activism. I've signed petitions and I've donated, but there's nothing quite like actually being physically out there protesting. And I know that me and Zach are so impressed with you, Will, and we support you 100% in that. And we want to join you in those protests as soon as we can.
Yeah,
Thank you.
again, John's taking the words right out of my mouth. Like I've been saying actions speak louder than words, and again, you've been taking the action, and like
Yeah, yeah,
Thank you. But then we could always, everyone, everywhere, always could always be more active. I've only been going to protests in my area, the Midlothian protests around Cedar Hill. I'll be going to one in Mansfield and in Ennis, Texas, in these next couple of days. But always, eventually I want to go to Dallas. It's just my family because I'm protesting with them. They're not comfortable with going to Dallas because there's still that fear that cops will be more violent down there and
right,
that my family members might be hurt. And that's
right,
something that we want.
yeah,
Back down to San Marcos, I'm definitely going to Austin and
yeah,
I'm definitely protesting in San Marcos where there are events.
for sure. And as soon as you do, I'll be right there with you. Zach, I know you're in the valley, so you're under completely different circumstances. But as soon as you're in San Marcos, I'll definitely be there with you, man.
hmm yeah, again, once I'm back up there, I will stand with y'all.
Yeah, and I'm with you. Will, I think you brought up an interesting point of like, I think some people thought like the end of this is like, okay, the guys are arrested now. They all have charges on them. But the ending should be when there's actual like change in how the system works, as far as like putting in that law enforcement oversight. Putting in something so that we know, okay, you're trying to make a change in how this works. You're trying to put a stop to police brutality. Police should be afraid of being of overstepping their power. Police should be afraid of taking someone's life. Like, there are some people I've seen, cops can't second guess themselves when they need to. And cops have a dangerous job. I'm not denying that. Cops absolutely have a dangerous job, and there are some times when they have to take that measure. But when it comes to a time when they don't know if someone is armed, I want them to second guess it. Like I hate to say it because I know how that sounds, but like I absolutely want there to be times where a cop is second guessing their decision. I want there to be that measure of a cop is afraid of being charged for murder. The same way that a black person or another minority is afraid of being out there with police, of being stopped by a police officer. I want cops to experience that fear. They need to experience that fear.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the precautions that they take when taking into account whether a situation is dangerous or not should definitely be something that should be taken more seriously because clearly um, it's not taken seriously enough because people have been killed over cops not doing their jobs correctly or cops not paying attention to or paying attention to um, the people they're surrounded with or not taking the right precautions.
100%.
It's the level of security that they should be taking for those situations should be professionalized way, way more. I think we're coming up on another intermission, are we?
I think this might be possibly the end. I believe, unless we.
I think we can end it here as far
I
as
am actually about to go to another protest. I'm going back out into my town. They're doing a protest outside of gas station. I'll be joining my sister.
That's amazing. So we will be calling it in here, and ultimately, to the people watching that made it this far, this is just kind of an example of the conversations that have to happen across the country as far as, because we need to make sure that, okay, am I contributing to the problem, and am I thinking about it? Because if you're not thinking about it, then you are contributing to the problem.
Yeah. And just in terms of how I want to end it off is, I've been saying it throughout the whole time, but actions do speak louder than words. I think if you are speaking out, that is still great. But if you can take the time to sign the petitions down below, if you can take the time, if you have the ability to donate, please donate. I know that there are ways where you can donate without having, if you don't have the money or the resources, where you can watch YouTube videos without ad block, and then as you watch, you're helping to contribute. So there are still ways where you can contribute even if you don't have the resources available. And
100%.
we'll do our best to share the resources with y'all. We'll have links down below here for everything you need in terms of ways to take action. And it's not over. It's we've succeeded. We've accomplished one of the goals. But the key word of that is it's one of the goals. We still have a lot of goals to go.
Right.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the whole reason we did this, is there's no question about it. Where do we stand on it? Black Lives Matter. Where does this company stand on it? Black Lives Matter. 100%. I want there to be no doubt about where we stand on this issue.
And keep the conversation going down in the comments. We'd love to see y'all's response to what's going on and how y'all feel about everything that's happened so far. Yeah. And be sure to comment questions for our next video, which may have a lighter tone to it.
Sorry, I had to burp for a little bit. I'm so sorry. There's a whole there, but we're good. Yes. The next episode will most likely be lighter, and we'll be back to our other forms, is what I'll say.
Right. Yeah, and not to plug our channel. That's not what this is for. But if you do subscribe, this company will be releasing, different projects, different podcasts, different videos, and those will have a more serious tone. We have future podcasts in the works, that are going to be much more serious and dealing with much more serious things. So if you want to keep up with that, then please give us a subscribe. Again, that's not a plug for us. That's just a plug for talking about these serious issues that we face every single day. So I think we can go ahead and call this the end. Thank you everyone for watching, and thank you for having this serious conversation with us. Once again, Black Lives Matter, always.
Stay safe out there, everyone.
And do your best to do whatever you can.